morning, everybody. The acronym for SAPIA is stands for Southern African Plant Invaders Atlas. I know many people have heard of this before, but just for the benefit of those who haven't, I will go briefly through the history of this project. The database in the Atlas project catalogues localities, habitats, and abundances of alien plant species growing outside of cultivation. It incorporates roadside surveys, which I started in 1979 and continued until 1993. We then started a mapping project that involved public participation. It was actually designed on the Bird Atlas project. The first phase started in 1994 and lasted for 5 years. Had funding from Environment Affairs. After that, there was a lack of funding, and I just collected ad hoc records as I went along. And then in 2005, Working for Water came to the rescue and provided funding for a second phase. And this went on until 2010, and then funding was again extended for another 5 years. The objectives of the phase 2 of SAPIA was to continue my roadside surveys of invasive plants, to encourage public participation in the project, but the emphasis turned towards emerging weeds. In the early phases of the project, it was looking at the distribution of all invasive plants, which in fact with my roadside surveys I still continue to do, but now the emphasis is looking for what are the new species that you can be concerned about, and this would also help in listing species for legislation. And finally, of most importance as well, was to support SANBI's early detection and rapid response program. In the past year, 1,800 records were added to the SAPIA database from my roadside surveys, and the blue blocks on the map, they indicate the two trips that I did during this year. About 200 records were received from EDRR from various parts, Michael Cheap being the star of the show. 400 records received from other SAPIA participants. 18 species were added to the SAPIA database, and of these, 14 were new or emerging species, of which we've got no other record. This is the first record for South Africa of species growing outside of cultivation. The database currently stands at about 78,000 records, covering about 1,500 quarter-degree squares in South Africa. There are about 720 species listed. The records span over 34 years. They're mostly for South Africa. In earlier years, I did try to get records from other SADC countries, but that wasn't entirely successful. All the information in the SAPIA database we tried to make available at this website called the Weeds and Invasive Plants website, which is part of AGIS, which is an agricultural georeference information system. And a huge amount of work was put into this, but unfortunately the whole management of the AGIS website has just come to an end. There's just nobody managing it at the moment. I have been in a meeting with Philip. We have spoken to agriculture just to see what they're trying to do to try and revive this. So unfortunately, you can still get a lot of information there, but the SAPIA data is only updated to October 2007. And I want to stress this to everybody, that all the updated information is available with me, and you can contact me. I also make copies of the database available to various people for them to access it. Fact sheets, I did have a 3-year contract with agriculture to populate information sheets on many of these species, and there are about 500 species that have information on them at that website. As part of the SAPIA project, I've been sending out electronic newsletters, and since 2006 there are 28 newsletters that have gone out. They're sent on a quarterly basis, and the list of email, the people that I send it to is about 500. I don't know entirely how many it eventually lands up with, because many people in turn send to others. And if anybody would like to be on that list, if they know of anybody, please let me know, and I would gladly add you to the list. These are really very well received, and every time I send out a newsletter, I always get new people wanting to be on the list. And I feel that it's also a way, for example, this last trip to the Waterberg, it is my way of getting the information that what I see is to be able to get this information back to the landowners then, to try and encourage them to do something about invasion. Now let's have a look at just some of the new emerging species. Most of these were recorded within the past year, but not entirely, but they're worth mentioning. This one was brought to my attention by Professor Bram van Wyk at the University of Pretoria, growing outside the property of ARC, just north of Victoria. We suspect it might actually be a plant that was cultivated for potential horticultural or other purposes. It's very attractive to bees. It's similar to lantana in that it is a shrub. It's the same family. It's a deciduous bush. It grows very quickly. And in this area, now as far as we know, it is confined to a relatively small area, and this is the very first record that we have of it in South Africa. So I do think that it is definitely something that EDRR should investigate. And I have sent information to Dansile, and she would have had a look at that. The comment from Bram van Wyk was that this is something that needs really urgent attention, and we hope that it doesn't become like another pom-pom weed. We must get in there and do something about it. This one has already been mentioned today. I mentioned it again here, that it's just within the past year that I received new records of this species and an EDRR target. This is something that I picked up on one of my field trips and also received from Elise Puter on the Transkei coast. Another member of the Verbenaceae. It is an ornamental shrub, widely invasive in the tropics and subtropics. One of the complications is that it suckers, and so that will also cause problems with clearing. Now, I put in this one and followed up by the next. Now, have a look at the similarity between this one and the next. This is something that I'm extremely concerned about. It is a relative of Chromalina, of pom-pom, Ageratana, that notorious group of aggressive invaders in South Africa. It has become invasive in New Zealand. It has been cultivated in South Africa, and it has even been promoted. I even saw it being promoted in one of the gardening magazines a couple of years ago. I have never yet seen the plant, but Jeff Nichols just in the past year told me of one particular garden in Howard where it has been cultivated. And this is just in exactly the right area for this plant. It is a forest margin species. It likes cool, moist conditions. And I did pass this on to Michael. I hope Michael will be able to go around there and just sort of check out to see where it is. It has been proposed on NEMBA as a Category 1 plant. And it definitely, this is something that we must get rid of if we find it. Cacti. Over the past year, there have been a number of new cacti that have been recorded. This one has already been targeted by EDRR in the Aldnace area. Helmut Zimmerman has been working with Peter Shisani and others there from the Limpopo area. A very, very spiny herisia. And it is really quite extensive, and maybe we'll hear more about this from EDRR itself. This variety of Apantia stricta was recorded in South Africa many years ago, but not really been recorded since then. And then on the latest field trip, I came across this, and this is possibly also for something for EDR to have a look at. It's a very pretty form of Apantia stricta, and could be a really nasty invader. And then we go across to something like even the ferns along the Natal coast. Here, the rabbitfoot fern, some popular ornamental fern growing on the tree trunk, on the trunk of a palm, together with the notorious sword fern. Now, invaders that I'm really concerned about, and I've only really become aware of them quite recently, is just the way that they grow. Along the Natal south coast, this Queensland umbrella tree, Schefflera actinophylla. It is a large freestanding tree which many of us will be familiar with. We normally buy it at a nursery, it's in a pot, you put it into the ground and it makes a nice big tree. But in the wild, it spreads. It is spread by birds. The seed is dropped in the fork of a tree or in a rock crevice or any gap, any little notch along a tree. It germinates there and it grows as an epiphyte. It then sends its roots down, eventually reaching the ground, and in the process it strangles, it smothers its host plant. Now, how are we going to deal with something like this? We are normally looking at trying to control things growing on the ground. Now we're having to look up into trees, and how do we deal with this? And this Schefflera, for example, is an extremely popular tree. Jeff Nichols is another one who said to me, this will become the bugweed of the Natal coast. That's what we're looking at. And there are a few species that do this. Another one is the pitch apple. There's a record that I've got from Kranzkloof of this, and in Hawaii, this species is an early detection species. They've been warning people to get to try and get rid of it. So this is a whole new ball game when it comes to invasive plants, strangler invaders. Now we come back again to prevention of new invasions. I talked about this last year. Every single year there are new species that we are aware of. And I just can't see how we are going to win this battle. We need stricter import controls. We need effective legislation. Our legislation still, there is nothing new is on the cards. But we can't just depend on legislation. We need to inform the public. We need to get them to cooperate with us, to understand. And now, my last appeal is this is really bothering me, about preventing new invasions by investigating so-called sterile or non-invasive cultivars. Every time I've been involved with the listing of species for legislation, and the horticulturist will come in and say, no, but we've got a cultivar of this species, it isn't invasive, and it's different. But we need to show this. Are these really any different? It may have variegated leaves, but it's still flowers. Does it produce seed? Does it cross-pollinate with the original form? And there are at least 20 species on the proposed list that need to be investigated this way. And so I appeal to research organizations for all the work that's been done on DNA barcoding. Maybe you could spend a little bit of time looking at this aspect. And when it comes to sterility, it's not good enough to just say, well, we haven't observed seed set. We need to know if a plant is not sterile, if it can produce viable seed, if it can produce fertile pollen and fertile embryo sacs. There's much more to it than that. Thank you.
Thanks, Lesley. We have a couple of minutes for questions. Lesley. John.
Just a quick comment. I'm very glad you brought up that first point about investigating sterile cultivars. But we do have a bursary scheme with the SANBI's Invasive Species Programme, and it'd be something we'd be delighted to fund if we could find a student who'd be keen to do that.
We need lots of them.
More questions? Okay, thanks very much, Lesley. Very good presentation.